Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Jankovitz, and today I'm going to talk to you about project management and managing groups effectively. So my goal here today isn't to bore you with too much theory on the topic, but rather provide you with hopefully a few tips that you can take away and implement them in your place of work. So sorry if you can hear the train going by the way. So feel free to ask any questions and I'll try to get to them at the end. And you can always email me too. I provided my email on my last slide. So we'll get started. So just some background on myself before we begin. I currently work as an adult services librarian at the Marlboro Free Library, which is located in Marlboro, New York, and is part of the Mid-Hudson Library System. I also serve as the chair of NYLA's Youth Services Section Marketing Committee, and I graduated with my MLS from St. John's University in 2017. So I first became interested in project management during my final year at St. John's, where I elected to do an independent study on how libraries can benefit from learning more about this topic and implementing it in the field. So ever since then, it's just kind of my interest. So what is project management and why is it important? The Project Management Institute defines project management as the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet project requirements. As our field has shifted quite a bit from working individually to working collaboratively and in teams with your library's own staff and outside organizations, project management has become really important to libraries. It can allow us to work more effectively and efficiently, stay on budget, and complete a task within a given timeline. Unfortunately, it's something that isn't really taught to us while in grad school. In 2016, when my professor and I analyzed the course catalogs of the 58 ALA accredited graduate schools in the United States and Canada, we found that only 10 of these schools offered a course in project management. So this is really an issue because all the way back in 2004, project management was noted as a core skill set of librarianship. So what defines a project? A project is different from your ongoing daily routines in that it has a set beginning and an end, it has clear goals, and that you have to progress in certain stages or phases to reach these goals, which I'll talk more about in my next slide. So it can also involve people that you don't normally work with, such as a website developer, different departments, etc. Also, at the end of the project, you should be able to measure if it was successful or a failure. So someone specifically takes responsibility for that project. So for instance, our library just launched a new website. So at the end of this project, we counted it as a success because it works, it launched on time, and really improved the ease of access for our patrons. Now, if the website launch was to be a failure, we know that it would be mine and my director's fault because we were managing the project. So to go into the stages of a project, it's important to understand these different stages and what you can expect out of them. So depending on who you talk to, these stages have different titles and can range from anywhere from 3 stages to 5. Some schools of thought have combined some of the stages, but I like to go with 5 stages because it really breaks down what you can expect. So before you have your team, someone will have an idea that they want the organization to carry out. A problem has been identified, the risks and benefits have been discussed, and you've decided to go ahead with it. Individuals are vetted to be on the team. This is called initiation, your first stage. The group will then move into the second stage, known as planning. This is when your team is assembled, you all meet for the first few times, the group becomes oriented to the task, ground rules are created, and a team contract and project schedule are created. Your team contract is an explicit agreement that lays out the ground rules for team members' behaviors and is important to developing a sense of ownership, defining responsibilities, and promotes a sense of accountability. Preferred methods of communication, how work will be divided up, and expectations should be decided upon. Now, this may seem like common sense, but how many of you, after starting a project and after the first few initial meetings with your team, return back to your desk and are still unsure of exactly what you should be doing or working on? So by creating a team contract, this should minimize this confusion. Another thing that is really important to set up during the planning stage is a project schedule. After creating a team contract, this should be your next step. A project schedule outlines important deadlines, tasks, and priorities. The more thought that goes into this, the more likely it is to stay on task. Going into the third stage, execution, this is where you will begin and where most conflict and dysfunction within your group begins to appear. So this stage is where team members will most likely voice their opposition to the team contract and resist against ideas. It's important to address these problems right away, as they can really derail your entire project during this phase. But generally speaking, this is where roles and norms are established and everyone begins working on their assigned tasks. Then your group will move into the monitoring phase. Some schools of thought combine monitoring with execution. Generally, everyone knows and accepts their roles at this time. Any groundbreaking problems will be resolved, and you are working on nearing the completion of your project. Finally, your group will eventually enter in the adjourning or closeout stage, hopefully before or on your deadline. This is when the project comes to a close and your team is working on wrapping up the project, such as doing evaluations and writing up any final reports. So now that we've covered some basic groundwork of what a project is and what you can expect during its lifespan, I want to talk about what you should do if you've been tasked with leading a project. Sometimes you might not have come up with an idea, but you've been tasked with leading the project and making sure it comes to a successful close. I want to go over some issues that may arise when working with your team and give you some tips on how you can manage some dysfunction. These tips are even helpful if you just find yourself a part of a team. So, when working with a team on a project, there are 5 common dysfunctions you can generally expect to occur. The chart on your screen was created by Patrick Lencioni, a leading expert in team dysfunction. He coached thousands of companies, and every problem within groups could be tied back to the issues on the chart. Now, the chart is hierarchical, and without establishing a strong base on the bottom, you can't achieve success in the next levels. You won't be able to solve a lack of commitment if you haven't established trust or gotten over a fear of conflict. The first dysfunction that is crucial to establishing a strong foundation is an absence of trust. Your group won't go anywhere with this. So this results from team members not wanting to open themselves up to others on the team and a fear of appearing weak or less than. They don't want to talk about mistakes, any weaknesses they may have, or ask for any help. So as a team leader, you need to be able to establish a level of trust on your team. Lead by example. Admit your own faults or weaknesses or mistakes, and others will follow. Create a positive environment to do this. So a fear of conflict is another big issue that may appear on your team. This is where no one wants to disagree with each other. Too much agreement can actually be a really bad thing. How many of you have ever sat in a meeting and weren't too sure if you agreed with what that person was proposing, but then you look around the room and everyone else seems to be in agreement, and you start to think, yeah, I guess I could get behind that. It's not too terrible of an idea, I'm just going to agree and go along with it, even though you really have doubts. This is super common and actually really detrimental and stems from an inability to manage agreement. This is known as the Abilene paradox, where members become too apprehensive to speak out and voice their opinions about team decisions as a result of negative fantasies about what will happen if they speak out. When leading your team, be extra aware of this and encourage feedback from your team, whether it's anonymous, one-on-one, or in a group setting. Play devil's advocate, don't be afraid to do so. Or you can implement De Bono's 6 thinking hat method, which I'll talk more about in my next slide, which encourages a different way of thinking. So the next issue that may occur is a lack of commitment. This generally occurs when the level of agreement has become unhealthy and really isn't any positive disagreement on your team. No one really knows what they're supposed to be doing. Everything is kind of vague, and there's a lack of direction. Communication and encouragement of feedback here is key, and this is where having a team contract and a project schedule is crucial. You can refer back to these documents for deadlines, member responsibilities, etc. Check in with your team, really find out what's going on. The next dysfunction is avoidance of accountability. Social loafing begins to occur here. Team members reduce their efforts because they feel less responsible for the output. Normally, by this point, your team has established some level of trust and commitment, so any conversation with these team members should be productive. It's a difficult conversation to have, but since your group has traveled this far up the pyramid, by implementing progress reports, breaking goals into smaller, more dividable pieces, and creating feedback mechanisms that hold individuals responsible, your team should be able to overcome this. Lastly is an inattention to results. This is where team members put themselves first before the collective good of the team. They are seeking individual recognition. To combat this, you need to establish a good foundation in the 4 categories prior to this one. This will help your team think more about the team mentality than themselves individually. Even if you aren't a team leader, it's good to be aware of these steps yourself so you can look out for them and communicate more effectively with your team leader. So to go back and talk about De Bono's 6 thinking hat method, which I mentioned earlier, this can be used as a different way to think. So, when working in groups, it's common for members to allow their emotions, differing views, etc., to prevent them from fully analyzing the components of a task, work together, and can just lead to a lot of confusion, misunderstandings, and resentment. The De Bono 6 thinking hat method is a way to take away all these components and think of just one thing at a time. So your group will then be able to separate emotion from logic, creativity from objective facts, and so on. So De Bono has associated each type of thinking with a different color hat. White is associated with objective facts and figures, red with emotional thinking, black with issues that may come up, yellow with positive outcomes that may occur, green with creativity, and blue with the use of other hats. If there's a disagreement in your group on a topic that they just can't seem to move past, the group leader or a team member can use these hats to structure and guide the thinking of a group. I use this a lot when working on projects discreetly to try to guide the conversation by saying, now let's talk about all the positive outcomes that maybe result of this project. Or if I know that everyone is agreeing with an idea, I'll ask them to see if they can think of any negative outcomes that may occur, or if there isn't really any objective facts or figures that we haven't taken into account yet. So by approaching the idea this way, it'll either become stronger because it's more fully thought out, or our team realizes that it's just something isn't really working there. So ultimately, the best thing you can do as a project leader or even as a team member is to encourage feedback and have open communication. Keep a log of all your meetings, record how your project has evolved since the last time your group met, and talk about your accomplishments, and discuss the goals you would like to see developed by the next time you meet. List any challenges your group is facing and possible solutions to these problems. And then what is your work plan for the next week? What needs to get done this week to keep your project on schedule? Establish a strong base of trust. I cannot stress this enough. You're not going to go anywhere without this. And finally, I cannot stress enough also the importance of planning. The more planning that goes into the project within the first 2 stages, the more likely you will be to stay on task, meet your deadlines, and minimize any confusion or dysfunction. So I hope some of the tips I provided you with today helps you lead and manage your teams more effectively and efficiently when working on a project. Please feel free to email me if you have any further questions. All my contact information is up on the slide. And once again, my name is Lindsay. I work at the Marlborough Free Library, and my email is ljankovitz@marlboroughlibrary.org. Thanks so much.